The mud was thick, clinging to everything. Liam's boot, the left one, was half buried near the dark mouth of the cave. It was a strange sight, because it was his boot, exactly like the one still on his foot, but it was just there, stuck in the wet earth, like someone had lost it in a hurry. He knelt down, his fingers brushing the cold, damp leather. It felt old, worn, like it had been there for a long time. A shiver ran up his spine, even though the air was still and heavy. The cave entrance yawned before him, a perfect circle of black against the gray rock. No light went in, and no light came out. It looked too neat, too smooth, like it had been cut out of the mountain with a giant cookie cutter. He stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the boot. It didn't make sense. They had just arrived at this strange cave, pushed here by the sudden storm. He looked around, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Where was Ethan? They had been walking side by side just moments ago, arguing about the map, about everything. Liam turned, ready to call out, ready to tell Ethan about the strange boot, to ask him if he saw it too. But Ethan wasn't there. The space behind him was empty. The trees, thick and dark, seemed to lean in, watching. The air grew colder, even though the storm hadn't fully hit yet. A gust of wind, sharp and sudden, rustled the leaves, making them whisper secrets he couldn't understand. He called out, "Ethan? Hey, Ethan!" His voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast quiet of the mountains. Only the wind answered, a low moan that seemed to come from the cave itself. He took a step back, his heart starting to thump hard against his ribs. The boot in the mud seemed to stare at him, a silent, muddy twin. He called again, louder this time, "Ethan, where are you?" No answer, just the cold, the quiet, and the dark mouth of the cave waiting. The feeling of unease grew into something heavier, like a stone in his stomach. He was alone, and the boot, his boot, was still there, half buried, a silent promise of something deeply wrong. The air around him felt thick, like a blanket. He could hear his own breathing, loud in his ears. The trees swayed, their branches like long, bony fingers. He felt a prickle in the back of his neck, like someone was watching him, but there was no one. Only the stillness, the looming cave, and the unsettling mystery of the boot. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He needed to find Ethan. But first, he needed to understand what he was seeing. The boot, identical to his own, was too real, too strange to ignore. It was a bad sign, he knew it, a very bad sign. The silence stretched long and thin like a wire pulled tight. He felt a sudden urge to run, to turn and flee from this place, but his feet felt stuck to the ground. He had to find Ethan. He had to. But the cave felt like it was pulling him in. The sun had been bright that morning, cutting through the crisp mountain air. Liam had packed his bag, his movements stiff, his face set. He didn't want to be here, not with Ethan. Their dad had said it would be good for them, a chance to reconnect after everything. But everything felt like a huge wall between them, built brick by brick over the last year. Liam still saw the guilt in Ethan's eyes, even when Ethan tried to hide it. And Liam felt it too, a heavy weight in his own chest, a guilt he couldn't shake even though he knew it wasn't his fault. He zipped up his backpack, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. Ethan was already outside, leaning against the truck, fiddling with his phone. He didn't look up when Liam came out. "Ready?" Liam asked, his voice flat. Ethan grunted, stuffing his phone into his pocket. "As I'll ever be." They started walking, the trail winding through tall pine trees. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. Birds chirped, a happy sound that felt out of place with the heavy quiet between them. They walked for a long time, the only sounds their boots crunching on the gravel and the distant rush of a river. Liam kept his eyes on the path, trying not to look at Ethan. He remembered other hikes when they were kids. They would laugh, push each other, race to the top of hills. Now it was just silence. A thick, awkward silence that made the mountain feel even bigger, even more uncaring. The Rockies stretched out around them, huge and silent, their peaks touching the sky. They didn't care about two brothers who couldn't talk to each other. They just stood there, ancient and grand, watching. Liam thought about the accident, the car, the rain, the way Ethan had looked at him, eyes wide with fear right before it happened. He pushed the thought away. It always came back. He tried to focus on the beauty around him, the way the sunlight hit the trees, making the needles glow green. But the beauty felt cold, distant. It didn't warm the empty space between him and Ethan. He glanced at Ethan. Ethan was looking at the ground, his shoulders hunched. He looked tired even though they had just started. Liam wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence. But the word got stuck in his throat. What could he say? "I forgive you? It's not your fault?" But he wasn't sure if he meant it. Not completely, and that was the problem. The unspoken things hung in the air, heavier than their backpacks. The trail kept going up, up, up. Each step felt like a burden. The air grew thinner, and the silence grew thicker. It was going to be a long trip, a very long trip. He could feel the tension humming between them like a tight string. It made his teeth ache. He wished he was anywhere else, anywhere but here, with Ethan, in this vast, beautiful, and utterly silent mountain range. The indifference of the mountains was almost a comfort, in a strange way. They didn't judge. They just were. And so were Liam and Ethan, two broken pieces trying to fit back together, or maybe just trying to survive. The sky had been a clear, bright blue just an hour ago. Now it was turning a bruised purple, dark and angry. A low rumble echoed through the mountains. Not thunder yet, but a warning. Liam checked the map again, his finger tracing the thin red lines. "We should be close to the river crossing," he mumbled, more to himself than to Ethan. Ethan was already looking up, his face tight. "Looks like we're in for it." Suddenly the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Branches swayed wildly, groaning like old bones. Then the rain hit, not just rain, but a wall of water, cold and hard, driven by a fierce wind. It stung their faces, soaked their clothes in seconds. They pulled their hoods up, but it was no use. The trail, already muddy, turned into a slippery mess. And then the ground shook, a deep rumbling sound like the mountain itself was groaning. "Landslide," Ethan yelled, pointing. Up ahead, a section of the trail had simply vanished. Trees were ripped from the ground, rocks tumbled down the slope, crashing with loud bangs. The path they were on was gone. They stared at the chaos, soaked and shivering. There was no way forward on this trail. "We need to get off this ridge," Liam shouted over the wind. "Find some cover." They scrambled down a steep, rocky slope, slipping and sliding. The rain made everything slick. They found themselves in a narrow gully, the water rushing around their ankles. It wasn't on the map. Nothing around them looked familiar anymore. The storm had changed everything. The trees were thicker here, darker. The air felt heavy, quiet, even with the rain hammering down. They pushed through thick bushes, their faces scratched by branches. Then Liam saw it. A faint path, barely visible, winding through the dense undergrowth. It looked like a game trail made by animals. It was unnervingly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the steady drumming of the rain. "This way," Liam said, his voice hoarse. "Maybe it leads to a sheltered spot." Ethan hesitated, looking at the map, then at the strange trail. "It's not on the map, Liam. We could get more lost. Do you have a better idea?" Liam shot back, gesturing at the raging storm. "Stay out here and get washed away?" Ethan didn't answer. He just nodded, his face grim. They followed the game trail. It twisted and turned, getting narrower and darker. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches dripping with rain. The quiet was the strangest thing. It was too quiet. No sounds of the storm, no sounds of animals, just their own heavy breathing and the squish of their boots in the mud. The air grew colder, even though the rain was still warm. The ground underfoot felt soft, spongy. They kept walking, deeper and deeper into the quiet, strange woods, away from the familiar path, away from everything they knew. The trail felt like it was pulling them, drawing them further into the unknown. Each step was a step into a place that didn't want to be found. The game trail ended abruptly, not with a clearing or a stream or another path, but with a wall of rock, and in the middle of that wall, a perfect circle. It was a cave mouth, dark and inviting, yet deeply unsettling. It was too round, too smooth, like it had been carved by something unnatural. The rock around it was different too, darker, almost black, and it seemed to absorb the light, making the entrance look even deeper, even more like a hungry mouth. Liam and Ethan stood before it, soaked to the bone, shivering. The storm outside was still raging, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain coming down in sheets. They could hear it, a distant roar, but here, at the cave entrance, it was strangely quiet. The air was still, cold, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. Ethan pulled out his map again, his fingers trembling slightly. He unfolded it, the wet paper clinging to itself. He stared at it, then at the cave. "It's not here," he whispered. "There's no cave marked here. Nothing." Liam looked at the map. He knew it. This place didn't exist on any chart. It was like the mountain had decided to open up just for them. "It's shelter, Ethan," Liam said, his voice trying to sound calm, but a tremor ran through it. "The storm's getting worse. We can't stay out here." Ethan looked at the dark opening, then back at the raging storm. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and desperation. What if it's not safe? What's safer?" Liam countered, gesturing to the violent weather. "Getting hit by lightning? Freezing to death?" They both knew the answer. Reluctantly, with heavy hearts and a growing sense of dread, they stepped towards the dark mouth. The air inside felt instantly colder, stiller. It was like stepping into a different world. The sound of the storm outside vanished, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on their ears. They could hear their own breathing, loud and ragged. The entrance was just big enough for them to walk through without bending. As they crossed the threshold, a final, powerful gust of wind from outside slammed into their backs, pushing them deeper into the darkness. It felt less like they were walking in and more like they were being pulled. The circular opening behind them seemed to shrink, or maybe it was just the darkness swallowing it. They were inside. And the cave, the unmarked, unknown cave, closed around them, a cold, silent tomb. The air grew heavy, like it was pressing on their chests. The metallic smell was stronger now, making Liam's nose wrinkle. He could feel the dampness on his skin, even though the rain wasn't reaching them here. The silence was absolute, a thick, smothering blanket. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were the only two people left in the world. In the cave, it felt ancient, like it had been waiting for them. The air inside the cave was cold and still, like a breath held for 1,000 years. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something sharp and metallic, like old blood or rust. Their footsteps echoed, soft squishes in the mud, then a hollow tap as they hit solid rock. The darkness pressed in thick and heavy, but their headlamps cut through it, making the rough walls glow a dull gray. They moved slowly, their eyes scanning every shadow. The passage was wide at first, but then it narrowed, forcing them to walk in single file. Ethan went first, his lamp beam bouncing nervously. "Look," Ethan whispered, his voice barely a sound. Liam shone his light where Ethan pointed. On the cave wall, carved into the stone, were strange shapes. Not pictures, but geometric patterns. Sharp lines and perfect circles, triangles and squares, all fitting together like a puzzle. They weren't like any ancient carvings Liam had ever seen. They felt wrong, too precise too, new, yet also impossibly old. They ran their hands over the smooth, cool stone. The carvings were deep, worn by time or by countless hands. As they moved deeper, the carvings continued, sometimes stretching across the entire wall. Then they saw them. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tally marks, scratched into the stone, one after another, in neat rows. Each mark was a thin, deep line, like someone had counted something, day after day, year after year. They stretched as far as their lights could reach, disappearing into the darkness. It was like a giant calendar or a record of endless waiting. "What do you think these are?" Ethan asked, his voice hushed. Liam shook his head. "I don't know." Someone was here for a long time. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Who would be here, in this dark, silent place, counting the days? And why? The sheer number of marks was unsettling. It suggested a history of long, lonely hours, of someone trapped, waiting, hoping. The air grew heavier, the metallic smell stronger. The silence was broken only by their breathing and the soft drip of water somewhere far off. The geometric carving seemed to pulse in the dim light of their lamps, almost alive. They felt like a language they couldn't understand, a message from a time long past or a warning for the future. The cave felt like it was watching them, its ancient eyes hidden in the shadows. Every step deeper was a step into a mystery they weren't sure they wanted to solve. The tally marks were a silent scream, a testament to someone's endless time in the dark. It started subtly, a faint, rhythmic sound, barely there. Thump, thump. Like a distant heartbeat deep within the earth. Liam heard it first, a low vibration in the soles of his boots. He stopped, holding his breath, listening. Ethan, a few steps ahead, turned. "What is it? Did you hear that?" Liam whispered. A thumping sound. Ethan listened. "I don't hear anything." They walked on, the silence pressing in again. But then Liam heard it again, clearer this time. Thump, thump. It was slow, steady, like a giant drum beating far away. He looked at Ethan, whose eyes were wide. "There it is," Ethan breathed. "I hear it now." The sound grew louder as they moved deeper into the cave, a slow, heavy pulse. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a vibration that went through their bones. Thump, 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 thump. It felt like the cave itself was alive, its heart beating in the darkness. They tried to find the source, shining their lights in every direction, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed off the rough walls, making it impossible to pinpoint. "Hello?" Liam called out, his voice shaking a little. "Is anyone there?" His voice bounced off the walls and came back to them. "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? There? There?" But it wasn't quite right. The echo was distorted, stretched out, and somehow mocking. The last "there" sounded thin, almost like a giggle. Ethan called out, too. "Who's there?" His voice returned. "Who's there? Who's there? There? There?" Again, the strange distortion, the last word sounding like a sneer. A cold dread settled in Liam's stomach. It wasn't just an echo. It was like something was playing with their voices, twisting them, making fun. The thump-thump grew a little faster, a little louder. It filled the cave, filling their ears, their minds. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, a living thing in the darkness with them. The air grew heavy, thick with the sound. They felt watched, listened to. The mocking echo made the hairs on Liam's arms stand up. The cave was not empty, and whatever was in it was not friendly. The thumping was relentless, a constant reminder that they were not alone. They kept walking, the thump-thump growing steadily louder, a relentless heartbeat in the dark. Then Liam saw it. Half buried in the mud just off the main path was a hiking boot. It was worn, muddy, and exactly like his own. The same brand, the same color, even the same scuff marks on the toe. His breath hitched. He remembered the boot at the cave entrance. This was another one. "Ethan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Look." Ethan saw it. His face went pale. "Another one? What is this?" They shone their lights around, and then they saw more. Another boot a few feet away, and another, a trail of discarded hiking boots, all identical to their own, leading deeper into the darkness of the cave. Each boot looked like it had been worn, then simply dropped, left behind. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching as far as their lights could reach, disappearing into the black. It was like a path made of their own lost footsteps. Ethan's fear grew, his hands shaking as he held his lamp. "No, no, Liam, this is wrong. We need to go back, now." His voice was tight, filled with panic. He looked around wildly, as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. But Liam felt a strange pull, a morbid curiosity. It was horrifying, yes, but he couldn't look away. He had to know. Who left these? Why were they all the same? What did it mean? It was like a puzzle, a dark, twisted puzzle, and he felt a strange need to solve it. "We have to know, Ethan," Liam said, his voice calmer than he felt. "We have to see where they lead." "Lead to what?" Ethan cried, his voice rising. "More of us? More boots? This isn't right. This isn't natural." The thump-thump of the cave grew louder, faster, like it was excited. It seemed to beat in time with Liam's own heart, a strange, unsettling rhythm. He took a step forward, following the trail of boots. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then, with a groan of despair, followed him. They walked on, their lamps cutting through the thick darkness, illuminating the endless line of abandoned boots. Each one was a silent question, a chilling clue. The air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. The cave felt like it was closing in around them, eager to show them its secrets, or perhaps its victims. Liam felt a strange mix of fear and a powerful, undeniable urge to know what was at the end of this horrifying trail. The trail of identical hiking boots continued, a chilling path into the unknown. But then the objects changed. Liam's light fell upon something small, half buried in the mud next to a boot. He knelt down, pulling it out carefully. It was a pocket knife. Its handle chipped and scratched. His pocket knife, the one he had lost years ago when he was just a kid, on a camping trip with his dad and Ethan. He remembered how upset he'd been, how he'd searched for hours. And here it was, in a dark, unknown cave, miles from where he'd lost it. "No way," he whispered, turning the knife over in his hand. It was definitely his. He knew every scratch, every tiny imperfection. Ethan, looking over his shoulder, gasped. That's your old knife, isn't it?" His voice was thin with disbelief. They looked around, their lamp sweeping the ground, and then they saw more. A small plastic soldier, its arm broken off. Ethan's favorite toy from when he was 5, the one he'd cried about for days when it disappeared. A faded baseball card bent at the corner, one Liam had treasured. A small, smooth skipping stone painted with a crude blue star, something they had made together one summer. Each item was deeply personal, something only they would recognize, something tied to their childhood, to memories only they shared. How is this possible?" Ethan stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "These are ours, from when we were kids. How did they get here?" The cave seemed to hum around them, the thump-thump growing louder, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the ground. It wasn't just a place that collected things. It was a place that knew them. It knew their past, their shared history, their lost treasures. This wasn't just a random collection of objects. It was a deliberate, terrifying display. It was psychological, designed to mess with their minds, to make them question everything. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of these impossible discoveries. The cave wasn't just trapping them, it was playing with them, using their own memories against them. Liam felt a cold dread spread through him, colder than the cave air. This place wasn't just a cave. It was something else, something that could reach into their past and pull out their most private moments. The trail of objects wasn't just a path. It was a journey through their own lives, a horrifying reminder of everything they had ever lost. And it was leading them deeper, always deeper, into the heart of the unknown. The narrow passage suddenly opened up into a vast chamber. Their headlamps, usually so strong, seemed weak here, swallowed by the sheer size of the space. The air was colder, and the thump-thump was now a constant booming presence, vibrating through the very rock beneath their feet. But it wasn't the size that made them freeze. It was the walls. They were covered in faces, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, carved into the stone. Not rough, ancient carvings, but hyper-realistic, as if someone had pressed a living face into the rock. And every single face was Liam or Ethan. They were at different ages. There was a baby Liam, eyes wide with wonder. A toddler Ethan, chubby cheeks and a mischievous grin. Teenage Liam, with his awkward haircut. Young adult Ethan, just like he was now, but with a look of pure terror etched onto his stone features. And older versions, faces lined with worry, eyes sunken with despair. Some were screaming, mouths open in silent agony. Some were crying, stone tears running down their cheeks. Others just stared, their eyes hollow, filled with a deep, endless sadness. Liam saw his own face, twisted in a silent scream, and felt a cold hand grip his heart. He saw Ethan's face, eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. It was a gallery of their lives, a horrifying timeline of their existence, all captured in stone, all showing expressions of terror and despair. The chamber was a mirror, reflecting their deepest fears back at them. The thump-thump was deafening now, a frantic pulse that seemed to beat in time with their own terrified hearts. "It's us," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "All of us. How?" Liam couldn't speak. He just stared at the wall, at the endless parade of his own face, his brother's face, all trapped in stone, all suffering. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken screams of the stone faces. It was like they were looking into a horrifying future or a collection of past failures. The cave wasn't just showing them their past. It was showing them their pain, their fear, their despair. And it was feeding on it. The faces seemed to watch them, their stone eyes following their every move. This chamber was a monument to their fear, a chilling reminder that they were not just lost, but utterly, completely trapped. Panic hit them like a physical blow. The chamber of faces, the endless thump-thump, the personal objects, it was all too much. "We have to get out," Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. He spun around, looking for the passage they had just come through, but it wasn't there. Where the narrow opening had been, there was now a solid wall of rock, smooth, unyielding, as if it had always been there. No cracks, no seams, just solid stone. It was like the cave had swallowed its own entrance. "No!" Liam yelled, rushing forward, slamming his hands against the cold rock. It was real. It was solid. They were trapped. It was just here. It was right here. Ethan joined him, his fists pounding on the wall, tears streaming down his face. "It's gone. It's gone. We're stuck. Oh, God, we're stuck." The thump-thump of the cave grew frantic, a wild, joyful beat like a heart celebrating a victory. The stone faces on the walls seemed to grin in the dim light, their carved despair now looking like mocking triumph. The air grew thick with their rising panic. They started to argue, their voices high and desperate. "This is your fault," Ethan screamed, turning on Liam. "You wanted to follow the boots. You wanted to see where they led." "My fault?" Liam shot back, his own fear turning into anger. "You're the one who got us off the main trail. You were messing with your phone instead of watching the map." "I was trying to find a signal. We were lost because of you, Liam. Always so stubborn, always thinking you know best." Their words bounced off the stone walls, adding to the chaotic symphony of their fear. The argument was bitter, fueled by their terror and the long-held resentment that had festered between them. All the unspoken anger, all the guilt, all the blame came spilling out in the dark, echoing chamber. They were trapped, and in their desperation they turned on each other, tearing open old wounds. The cave seemed to feed on their anger, the thump-thump growing louder, more powerful, like a hungry beast enjoying its meal. They were truly alone now, not just in the cave, but in their own minds, separated by a wall of blame and fear. The solid rock behind them was a cruel joke, a final inescapable trap. They stumbled away from the now solid wall, their argument dying down into ragged breaths and desperate sobs. "There has to be another way," Liam choked out, wiping tears from his eyes. He scanned the chamber, his lamp beam darting across the hundreds of carved faces. He spotted another passage, a dark opening they hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a shadowed corner. "Maybe this one," he mumbled, hope thin and fragile, flickering in his chest. Ethan, exhausted and defeated, just nodded, too tired to argue. They stumbled towards it, their legs heavy, their minds numb with fear. The thump-thump was still frantic, a relentless drumbeat that pushed them forward. They entered the new passage, their hopes clinging to the idea of an escape. They walked for what felt like hours, the passage twisting and turning, sometimes wide, sometimes so narrow they had to squeeze through. The air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. They saw more tally marks, more geometric carvings, but no more personal objects. Just endless stone, endless darkness. They pushed through, their muscles aching, their throats raw from shouting and crying. Then Liam saw a faint glow ahead. A light. Hope surged through him, a powerful wave. "Ethan, look! Light!" They quickened their pace, stumbling towards the glow, their hearts hammering with renewed hope. The passage opened up, and they stepped out into the Chamber of Faces. The same vast chamber, the same hundreds of hyper-realistic faces carved into the walls, all of them Liam and Ethan at various ages, displaying expressions of terror and despair. The same deafening thump, thump, now even more frantic, a triumphant roar. The same solid wall where the entrance should have been. The horrifying realization dawned on them, cold and sharp as a knife. The cave's geography was actively changing. It wasn't just a maze, it was a living, breathing entity, twisting and turning its passages, making sure they always came back to the beginning, always back to their own carved despair. They were trapped in a loop, a horrifying cycle with no end. Ethan sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands, a broken sob escaping his lips. "No," he whispered over and over. "No, it's impossible. We're never getting out." Liam stared at the faces, at his own carved agony, at Ethan's stone despair. The thump-thump was almost constant now, a maddening rhythm that filled his head, drowning out all other thoughts. It was the sound of the cave's hunger, its victory. They were caught, like flies in a spider's web, and the web was twisting itself tighter and tighter around them. The cave was playing with them, enjoying their terror, feeding on their hopelessness. There was no escape, not like this. In the depths of their despair, huddled in the Chamber of Faces, the relentless thump-thump pounding in their ears, a new sound cut through the suffocating noise. It was faint at first, barely a whisper carried on the cold, still air. Liam strained to hear it, his heart still racing from the horrifying realization of the loops. Liam, it was his name, his own voice, but it wasn't him speaking. It was coming from a dark side passage they hadn't seen before, hidden in the deep shadows of the chamber. It was just a slit in the rock, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, easily missed amidst the vastness of the carved walls. Ethan heard it too. He lifted his head, his eyes wide, looking towards the sound. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Someone called your name." "It's my voice," Liam said, a chill running down his spine. "But it's not me." The whisper came again, a little clearer this time. "Over here! Help me!" It was definitely his voice, but it sounded older, weaker, filled with a profound weariness. It was like listening to a recording of himself, but a recording that had aged, that had suffered. The thump-thump seemed to quiet just a fraction, as if the cave itself was listening, waiting. Liam felt a strange mix of fear and a desperate, illogical hope. Could it be someone else? Another lost hiker? But the voice, it was too familiar, too much like his own. He slowly got to his feet, his lamp beam fixed on the dark opening. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling despite himself. The whisper answered. "I'm here, I'm lost, just like you." Ethan grabbed Liam's arm. "No, Liam, don't. It's a trick. This whole place is a trick." His eyes darted nervously between the dark passage and the mocking faces on the walls. But Liam felt a pull, a strange compulsion to follow the voice. It was his voice calling to him. He had to know. He had to see. What if it was someone who could help them, or someone who knew what this place was? He pulled away from Ethan's grasp and took a hesitant step towards the dark slit in the rock. The whisper came again, a little stronger, a little more urgent. "Hurry, before it's too late." The voice was filled with a deep, aching sadness. It was the sound of someone who had given up, but still held a tiny spark of hope. And Liam, against his better judgment, found himself drawn to it, drawn to the sound of his own voice, calling from the darkness. Liam squeezed through the narrow opening, Ethan reluctantly following behind him. The passage was even darker than the main chamber, the air heavier, colder. The thump-thump was muffled here, a distant, dull throb. They moved slowly, their lamps cutting through the thick blackness. The whispered voice continued, guiding them deeper, always deeper. Just a little further. "I'm here." Then, the passage opened into a small, cramped alcove, and there, huddled against the cold stone wall, was a man. He was thin, his clothes ragged and dirty, his hair long and matted. His face was gaunt, covered in a thick layer of grime, but even through the dirt, Liam could see it. It was his own face, an older, broken version of himself. His eyes were sunken, filled with a profound weariness, but they held the same shape, the same color as Liam's, his nose, his jawline, the way his lips curved. It was unmistakably Liam. He was wearing clothes that were tattered and torn, but Liam recognized them. The same hiking pants, the same faded blue jacket, the same worn leather boots. One of them, the left one, was missing. The older Liam looked up, his eyes meeting Liam's. A slow, sad smile spread across his grimy face. "Hello, me," he rasped, his voice hoarse and weak, but still undeniably Liam's. "Took you long enough." Ethan gasped, stumbling back, his hand flying to his mouth. No, this isn't real. This can't be real." He stared at the older Liam, then back again, his face a mask of horror. Liam felt a cold dread settle in his bones, heavier than anything he had felt before. This wasn't a trick. This was him, or a version of him, trapped here, just like the faces on the wall. The older Liam looked like he had been there for years, perhaps decades. He was a ghost of a future Liam, a terrifying glimpse into what might become of him. The air in the alcove felt suffocating, thick with the weight of this impossible meeting. The thump-thump of the cave was a low hum here, a constant reminder of the entity that had brought this nightmare to life. The older Liam raised a trembling hand, beckoning them closer. He was a living, breathing warning, a chilling testament to the cave's power. The older Liam coughed, a dry, rattling sound that echoed in the small alcove. He looked at them, his eyes, so much like Liam's own, filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. "You're wondering, aren't you?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "How I'm here. How you're here. How any of this is real." He paused, taking a slow, painful breath. "This cave, it's not just a cave. It's alive. It's a living thing." He shifted, wincing, and leaned his head against the cold rock. It feeds on regret, on what-ifs, on the paths not taken, on the possibilities that died, and it feeds on separation, on the distance between people. Liam and Ethan stared at him, their minds struggling to grasp his words. "What do you mean feeds?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "It traps you," the older Liam continued, his gaze distant, as if looking into another time. "It finds the cracks in you, the guilt, the blame, the things you wish you could change, and it uses them. It shows you what you've lost, what you could have had. It twists your memories, makes you relive your mistakes, and it keeps you here, in loops, until you break." He gestured vaguely towards the main chamber. "The faces, those are all of us, all the versions of us that have been trapped here. Every time you go through a loop, every time you give in to the despair, another one is carved. It's a record of its meals." He looked directly at Liam, his eyes piercing. "You two, your guilt, your blame for each other, it's like a feast for this place. It makes you relive it over and over until you're nothing but regret." "How long have you been here?" Liam asked, his voice barely audible. The older Liam smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Long enough to forget. Long enough to become this. I was you, Liam. I was you right before you found this place, and I made the wrong choice." He coughed again, a longer, more painful fit. The thump-thump, that's its heart, its hunger. It gets louder when it's feeding, when it's close to breaking you. He looked at Ethan. "It thrives on your separation, on the anger, the blame. It wants you to be alone. Because when you're truly alone, truly broken, that's when it can consume you completely." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. The cave was not just a physical trap. It was a psychological predator, preying on their deepest wounds. The older Liam struggled to sit up, his eyes fixed on Liam and Ethan. His voice, though weak, held a desperate urgency. "There's only one way out. I've seen it. I've tried to tell myself, but I was too broken, too far gone." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "The cave, it demands a sacrifice." Liam and Ethan exchanged a terrified glance. "A sacrifice," Ethan whispered, his voice barely a breath. The older Liam nodded slowly. "One life must be willingly left behind. One of you must choose to stay, to be consumed by this place so the other can go free." His eyes, so like Liam's, were filled with a terrible sadness and a faint flickering hope. "It's the only way to break the loop, to stop its feeding. It wants the regret, the possibility. If one of you willingly gives it everything, the other can walk out." He looked from Liam to Ethan, his gaze lingering on the younger Liam. "I tried to sacrifice myself once, but I was alone. It didn't work. It needs a willing choice, a true sacrifice, not just a surrender." He closed his eyes for a moment, a spasm of pain crossing his face. "It's a terrible choice, but it's the only choice. One of you walks away, the other stays forever." The words hung in the cold, still air of the alcove, a heavy, suffocating weight, a sacrifice. One of them had to die, had to be trapped forever in this living nightmare so the other could live. The thump-thump of the cave, though muffled, seemed to quicken, a hungry anticipation. The older Liam had presented them with the ultimate, most horrifying dilemma. The choice was theirs, and it was a choice that would rip open every wound, every resentment, every unspoken truth between them. The air grew thick with the unspoken question. Who would it be? Who would be left behind? The older Liam watched them, his eyes knowing, his face a chilling mirror of the future one of them would face. The terrible choice spoken by the older Liam ignited the fuse of their year-long resentment. All the unspoken words, all the festering guilt and blame exploded in the small, dark alcove. "You go!" Ethan screamed, his face contorted with fear and anger. "It's your fault we're here! You're the one who wanted to follow the damn boots!" "You're always dragging me into your stupid ideas." Liam recoiled as if struck. My fault. My fault. You're the one who was messing with your phone, not watching where we were going. You're the one who crashed the car, Ethan. You're the reason Dad's, the reason everything changed." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. The car, the accident, the unspoken truth that had been a wall between them. Ethan flinched, his eyes wide with hurt and fury. "Don't you dare bring that up. You think I don't live with that every single day? You think I wanted that to happen?" "You were driving," Liam yelled, his voice raw with pain and accusation. "You were distracted. You ruined everything, and you just stood there. You didn't do anything. You always just let things happen, Liam. You never fight for anything." Ethan's voice was high-pitched, desperate. They were screaming now, their voices echoing off the stone walls, mixing with the low, hungry thump-thump of the cave. The older Liam watched them, a silent, sorrowful figure, his face confirming the truth of their words. Their argument wasn't just about the cave, it was about their entire lives, about the accident that had shattered their family, about the blame they had both carried, silently, for so long. Every old wound was ripped open, bleeding fresh pain into the suffocating air. They pushed each other, their hands grabbing at clothes, their faces inches apart, spitting words that were meant to hurt, to wound. The cave seemed to hum with their anger, the thump-thump growing louder, a triumphant beat. It was feeding, gorging itself on their fear, their resentment, their deep, bitter fight. They were trapped, not just by the cave, but by their own past, by the unresolved pain that was tearing them apart. During their bitter argument, Liam stumbled back, his gaze sweeping across the hundreds of carved faces on the chamber walls. His eyes, blurred with tears and anger, stopped on one particular carving, a teenage Ethan, his face twisted in silent despair. Then another, a younger Liam, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at dozens, then hundreds more. And then a cold, clear realization hit him, cutting through the fog of his rage. In every single carving, they were alone. He looked closer. Not one carving showed Liam and Ethan together. Not one showed them even near each other. They were always solitary figures, isolated in their stone agony. The baby Liam was alone. The toddler Ethan was alone. The older, broken versions of themselves were utterly, terrifyingly alone. "Ethan!" Liam gasped, his voice suddenly calm, cutting through the chaos of their fight. Look at the faces." Ethan, still seething, turned, his eyes narrowed. What about them?" "They're all alone," Liam whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the wall. "Every single one. There's no two of us together. The cave, it's feeding on our separation, on us being apart." Ethan stared at the walls, his anger slowly draining away, replaced by a dawning horror. He saw it too, the undeniable truth. His own face carved in stone, always by itself. Liam's face, always solitary. The older Liam, a chilling testament to ultimate loneliness. The thump-thump, which had been frantic during their argument, seemed to falter, to lose a beat. It was as if the cave was surprised, its meal suddenly interrupted. The older Liam, who had been watching their fight with a sad resignation, now looked up, a flicker of something like surprise, then hope in his weary eyes. "It wants us to be alone," Liam continued, his voice gaining strength, a new kind of clarity. "It wants us to blame each other, to stay separated. That's its food. That's how it keeps us here." The realization was a cold, hard truth. The cave wasn't just trapping them. It was actively trying to break their bond, to make them turn on each other, because their connection, their brotherhood, was the one thing it couldn't consume. The horror wasn't just about being trapped, it was about being forced into ultimate isolation. And in that moment, seeing the truth reflected in the stone faces, Liam knew what they had to do. The realization hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The cave fed on their separation. Liam looked at Ethan, truly looked at him, not with anger or blame, but with a sudden, overwhelming wave of understanding and regret for all the lost time. Ethan, his face still pale, met Liam's gaze, and in his eyes, Liam saw the same dawning awareness, the same flicker of pain and understanding. "I'm sorry," Liam said, the words catching in his throat. "About everything. About the accident. I blamed you, and I shouldn't have. It wasn't your fault." The words were hard to say, but once they were out, a huge weight lifted from his chest. Ethan's eyes welled up. "No, Liam, I'm sorry. I was driving. I was distracted. I should have been more careful. I've hated myself for it, and I hated you for making me feel worse." His voice broke. "I'm so sorry." They stumbled toward each other, arms reaching out. They hugged fiercely, tightly, for the first time in over a year. It wasn't a gentle hug. It was desperate, clinging, as if they were trying to hold on to each other, to piece themselves back together. All the bitterness, all the resentment, all the unspoken guilt melted away in that embrace. They cried, silent tears mingling on their cheeks. "I missed you," Ethan whispered into Liam's shoulder. "Me too," Liam choked out. "So much." The thump-thump of the cave, which had been a frantic, triumphant beat, now seemed to falter, to weaken. It was like a hungry beast suddenly losing its appetite. The carved faces on the walls, which had looked so despairing, now seemed less intense, their expression softening just a fraction. The older Liam, still huddled in the alcove, watched them, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. They pulled apart, but their hands remained clasped, fingers intertwined, a silent promise. Their bond, their brotherhood, was the one thing the cave could not replicate, could not feed on, could not break. It was their strength, their shield. They had faced their deepest fears, admitted their faults, and forgiven each other. And in that moment of true connection, they felt a power, a quiet defiance that had been missing before. They were united, and the cave they knew could not stand against that. Clasping hands, Liam and Ethan walked back into the main chamber, their steps firm, their eyes fixed forward. The thump-thump of the cave, which had faltered during their reconciliation, now grew frantic. It was a desperate, angry beat, like a frustrated animal thrashing against a cage. The sound vibrated through the rock, through their bones, trying to shake their newfound resolve. The carved faces on the walls seemed to twist, their expression shifting from despair to rage, their stone eyes burning with a cold fury. The air grew thick, heavy with the cave's desperate struggle. But Liam and Ethan didn't break their gaze. They didn't let go of each other's hands. Their grip was tight, a lifeline in the swirling chaos. They walked past the endless faces, past the solid wall where the entrance had been, past the dark passages that had led them in circles. The cave threw everything it had at them. The air grew colder, then hotter. Strange whispers seemed to come from the shadows, twisting their names, trying to sow doubt. Illusions flickered at the edges of their vision, glimpses of past mistakes, of things they regretted. But they held on. Their united front was a shield. The cave's power, which had fed on their separation, now found nothing to consume. It was like trying to drink from an empty well. The frantic thump-thump grew weaker, then surged again, a final desperate attempt to break them. But they were stronger. Their forgiveness, their bond, was an unbreakable force. Then, as they reached the very center of the chamber where they had first realized they were trapped, the air shimmered. The solid wall where the entrance had been began to ripple like water. Cracks appeared, thin lines of light piercing the darkness. The thump-thump gave one last agonizing shudder, then faded, becoming a faint, distant echo. The cracks widened. The stone crumbled, not with a crash, but with a soft, whispering sound like sand falling. And then the true entrance reappeared. The perfect circular opening, just as they had found it, but now bathed in a soft, golden light. Sunlight. They didn't hesitate. Still holding hands, they walked towards the light, stepping over the crumbling stone. The fresh air hit them, cool and sweet, smelling of pine and damp earth. They stepped out into the sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. The storm was gone. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds. Birds chirped in the trees. The world outside the cave was vibrant, alive, and utterly normal. They were out. They were free, and they were together. Weeks later, the memory of the cave still lingered, a cold shadow at the edge of Liam's mind. He was back home, the familiar comfort of his own room, a strange contrast to the endless darkness he had endured. He picked up a photo from their hiking trip, taken just before the storm hit. It was a picture Ethan had snapped of him, standing on a ridge, looking out over the vast green expanse of the Rockies. He looked tired in the photo, a little distant, but the mountains behind him were beautiful, majestic. He traced the outline of a distant peak with his finger, then his eyes drifted lower to the background of the photo. Barely visible, tucked away in the shadows of a cluster of trees, was a dark opening, a perfect circle against the rock. The mouth of the cave. His breath hitched. He hadn't noticed it when the photo was taken. He hadn't even known the cave existed then. But there it was, undeniable, a silent witness in the background of their innocent beginning. And then he saw it. Standing in the entrance, barely a smudge in the deep shadows, was a figure, a man. He was thin, his clothes dark, his face impossible to make out in the gloom. But Liam knew. He knew with a chilling certainty that made his blood run cold. There was another Liam. And standing there in the dark mouth of the cave, this other Liam was smiling. A wide, knowing smile that seemed to stretch across the shadows. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of quiet triumph, of endless patience. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting and would keep waiting. Liam dropped the photo as if it had burned him. It clattered to the floor, face down. He stared at the empty space where it had been, his heart pounding. The cave was still there, and it was still feeding. It hadn't consumed them, no. But it had kept a piece, a possibility, a version of Liam that was still trapped, still waiting, still smiling from the shadows. The memory of the thump-thump seemed to echo faintly in his ears. He looked around his room at the familiar walls, the comforting objects. But the safety felt thin, fragile. The cave was out there. And it remembered, it always remembered